this. I'd like to invite Katherine Tyner. And I think you can tell yourself. I do remember that you work at Center for Drug Evaluation at FDA, but your department is a bit too long, the name. So I know you're Associate Director of Science, the acting. But in your resume, there was also the name of the department. So perhaps you can tell us that yourself.
And this is how I forward.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So,
this is how you forward, and this is the pointer.
And a pointer, excellent. I am from the Food and Drug Administration, Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, Office of Pharmaceutical Quality. And in that, I am the Associate Director of Science. I am acting because they are going through a reorg of hiring practices, so I can't be official yet. But anyway, all right, so there's our FDA disclaimer. If you see an FDA talk, you're going to see that in pretty much every talk. But what I want to start with, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, it is very large. It regulates food and drugs, as well as medical products, radiological devices, tobacco products, and a whole range of other products within the U.S. marketplace. Despite the diversity of all the products that we do regulate, we do have unifying themes when we're thinking about nanotechnology. And those were formalized in an agency guidance in 2014, looking at the small print. The biggest part of that guidance were the points to consider. And so these are the points that the regulators consider when we're looking to see if nanotechnology has been applied to one of the products that we regulate. And so the first one is a very familiar concept, whether or not the material is in the dimensions of the nanoscale, roughly 1 to 100 nanometers. The second point to consider is whether or not that nanomaterial, if it falls outside of that range but goes up to 1,000 nanometers, if it has size-dependent properties. Now, despite the fact that we do have points to consider when we think the product may have some application in nanotechnology, we don't actually distinguish between that when we go through the regulatory pathways. So products that contain nanomaterials are going through the same pathways of products that do not contain nanomaterials. Regulations and laws don't separate them. And the reason why we do that is because we have performed multiple risk assessments for these products and have determined that the processes that we have at the FDA are robust enough to adequately identify and manage potential risks associated with these products. So let's move on to drugs, which is the part that I am associated with. So we did a technical profile of all of the applications submitted to FDA since the 1970s for drug products containing nanomaterials. And you can see that starting at the 1990s roughly, there we go, there was a dramatic increase of the submissions that we were seeing of these products. I'm just going. There we go. And so we have to date, over 600 drug product applications, also a handful of drug product approvals that are on the US market. That includes both new drugs as well as generic forms of those drugs. It keeps on growing. It grows every day as people submit, and we keep on improving things. When we look at what we're seeing in terms of the portfolio of these products, very diverse indications. All routes of administration. And the materials we see, again, really diverse range, ranging from anything from carbon-based to metallic. And the main things we're seeing there we go. So when we're looking at these last couple of years, some things we're seeing in terms of the trends, we're seeing growing complexity. So what we're seeing in terms of the nanomaterials, much more complex, much more multiple parts. Growing diversity, we're sort of seeing more subdivisions of the types of materials, the types of indications. And we're also seeing the generic follow-ons of the products that were approved initially. Late last year, there was a joint draft guidance that was published by the Center for Drugs as well as the Center for Biologics. And in that, it still follows the overarching agency theme about how we regulate the products, which is not any different than other products. So we're going to be looking for drug products that they make sure they meet the same standards of safety, efficacy, and quality, excuse me, as for other drug products. Now, we will ask questions to make sure that the drugs are doing that. And the more complex the drug, the more questions will probably be asked. And that's just true of any complexity that we're seeing or any emerging technology. The other main point, which is more for this session, is that we propose a risk-based approach for evaluating drug products containing nanomaterials. And that includes adequate characterization, understanding why the nanomaterial was put there in the first place, and the part that has the most scientific discussion, which is the most exciting, are how those nanomaterial attributes relate to the product quality, safety, and efficacy. Now, it's because it's a guidance, we have helpful tips of things that you may want to consider during your risk assessment. And so this is copied directly from the guidance of the things that we would hope that people will consider when they're developing that product. And so it's things like route of administration. It's also things like release testing and how mature the technology is. And so when we talk about maturity of the technology, our first nanodrugs were ones that were nanocrystals that were milled down until they got into the nanoscale range. Very easy at this point to understand. Look at the risk assessment. Compare that to some of the things we're getting now, which have multiple nanomaterials and multiple drugs. Far more complex, and also the manufacturing techniques are also more complex. So when we start thinking about that, there's more questions involved and more risk associated with it. So when we continue thinking about the risk management for developing these products, usually there's very specific reasons why a product is being developed to contain a nanomaterial. And those reasons are going to translate into the critical quality attributes of your product, which then are further characterized and controlled. Now, we already know throughout the literature that there's some critical quality attributes that you see common throughout all of the different products. And that would include particle size and shape, charge, surface, coating, how well the drug's encapsulated, if you have an encapsulation material. And these have been shown to alter the quality, safety, and efficacy of drug products. So quality by design is a technique that some companies use to help manufacture and develop their drug products. And nanomaterials fit into quality by design just like any other product. But if you think about the nanomaterials, the part where it really falls into the quality by design are those critical quality attributes. And then once they're identified, it's going to follow down through the product and process development, the control strategies with quality risk management, and the product lifecycle management and continuous improvement. And when I'm talking about identifying them, it's not just identifying them, but also characterizing them. And that goes into the final part of the continual improvement as technology, as analytical techniques improve, also improving that as well. So when we did our technical profile, we looked at the applications and we looked at the discussion that we had between industry and the regulators. And when we talk about attributes for nanomaterials, these four were asked in almost all of the applications. So what was the chemical composition, the average particle size and size distribution, shape morphology, and stability. And that stability not just being the chemical stability, but the physical stability of aggregation and agglomeration. Now, of course, and we say this all the time, different products, each product is unique. We look at everything case by case, so there's many other attributes. I mean, you can look at thousands of attributes of a nanomaterial, and there's thousands of different ways to characterize it. Which ones are important is where it becomes, where the science and the discussion comes in. So these on the right-hand side are ones that we commonly also have asked for different types of routes of exposure and different types of materials. When we talk about how to develop and having this risk-based approach, I think Robert already touched on this, communication with the regulators is key, early and often. And so our advice to companies is to come talk to us. We're a friendly bunch. So communicate early and often, discussing the characteristics of the formulation and how the nanomaterial quality attributes can impact the quality, safety, and efficacy. We recommend following in terms of a risk-based development, ICH Q8, Q9, and Q10. And again, discussing the challenging methods early in the development process so that you can have your clinical studies, your non-clinical studies, and they're all bridging very nicely. Now, we have mechanisms throughout the FDA to have people come and talk to us, and that spans all the way for a brand new drug that's never been conceived before, all the way to generics. So we do have formalized meetings that you can take place with the FDA so you can come and have these discussions with us. All right, so the next two slides are going to be full of hyperlinks. And so I know some folks are taking pictures. That's great. But if you want to have the hyperlinks work, email me, and I will provide the slides to you so you can click on them. The first are different guidances that we have that are available for nanomaterials in drug products. We have the overarching agency guidance, the CDER guidance, which came out last year. We also have a class-specific guidance for liposomes, which are the biggest percentage of the types of products we're seeing. That was actually finalized last year as well. It was a big year for nano for us at FDA. And then we also have product-specific guidances, which are bioequivalent specific guidances for generic products. And we have over 20 of them. Also have some quick additional references. These are the references that we point people to about when we talk about developing the CDER guidance. The guidance was not developed in a vacuum. We had lots of conversations with academia, with industry, lots of regulatory research as well. And so if you want to have a background on that, rather than spend the time talking about it, I will point you to those hyperlinks right there. And I meet my summary right at the end. We're seeing a diverse portfolio of drug products containing nanomaterials. Complexity and diversity is constantly increasing for us. Our approach to how we regulate them, the same as other products that don't contain nanomaterials. We have our guidance. I point everyone to that guidance. It's going through draft form right now. And we welcome discussion at any time of these products so we can help them develop and get onto the market. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Katherine. Any questions?
Katherine, very interesting talk. I'm just following up on your slide for industry and where the QBD comes into the equation. Because QBD should be actually carried out as a preliminary and empirical testing before you actually get into the development phase, isn't it? At R&D level, where you start knowing the ground. At the developmental phase, have you seen anybody that you send back to redo a QBD assessment to define the quality attributes?
Okay, so it's an interesting question. So you're correct. I mean, QBD is a developmental thing. It's something that's done. It's the sponsor's burden. It's something that we put out there as this has been used. It's shown to be useful. When we see applications, we will see QBD come sometimes even formalized during that assessment period so we can assess it. It makes it very nice for us and easy for us. In terms of, do we send them back if we don't agree with the QBD? Not in so many words. Now, if we had questions about the critical quality attributes, which is a part of it, we certainly have those discussions, but we won't like take your formalized, this is how I developed the drug, and say, that was terrible. We'll say, yeah, exactly. We'll ask questions about the parts that we feel would address the quality, safety, and efficacy, not necessarily the framework itself. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you for your presentation. Do you get a lot of applications for extracellular vesicles? Do you have guidelines for them, and how do you regulate them? Thank you.
So the extracellular vehicles are always an interesting one of where they fall into. In terms of the ones that we've seen, we haven't captured them as much. We haven't seen as much in ours, so I can't comment too much on them. In terms of the formalized guidance, we have some broad ones that you can get from the agency webpage.
There's one question here at the front.
You were talking about things getting more complex and some sort of. Have you had any surprises from how it's developed that have caused you to kind of rethink your approach or modify it or whatever?
So one of the things that we try not to be is reactionary. So we try not to be surprised too much, and we do that. We have a very robust regulatory research program, both internally as well as extramural programs, and then we also send people out to conferences, kind of get the idea. But that said, however great we are at kind of prepping for anything revolutionary, there's always going to be some that we weren't really expecting. And so we have had, I can give you one example. It was an analytical technique that was like, I would say it was used off-label. It was not a way that we'd ever seen that analytical technique used before. And we're like, that can't be right. We did the research. We found out, no, it was robust. It was validated. It worked perfectly for how the sponsor was using it. Surprised everyone. But again, when we talk about a regulatory pathway, we have the flex to be able to let companies come in and petition to use something and approve it if it works.
Okay. Thank you very much.